Imagine a man standing before thousands, claiming to be more than a servant of God, claiming to be God himself on earth. Bishop Marvin Winans, one of America's most celebrated gospel figures, has shocked followers, critics, and even his own congregation with words that seem unthinkable. What drove him to this? And what dark truths lie behind the sermons millions have revered? You won't believe what happened next. For decades, Bishop Marvin Winans has been celebrated as a pillar of gospel music and ministry. Millions have flocked to his sermons, hanging onto every word, believing in his spiritual guidance. But behind the applause and accolades, a story far more shocking has been quietly unfolding. Sources close to the ministry reveal behaviors, statements, and actions that raise questions no one dared to ask until now. From audacious claims of divine authority to decisions that left his congregation stunned, the truth about Marvin Winans is far from the picture-perfect image you've been shown. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. You're about to hear revelations that have never been publicly discussed, secrets that insiders feared would come to light. By the end of this video, you'll see a side of Marvin Winans that could shake your faith and change how you view one of gospel's most revered figures. And this is where it gets unbelievable. What happens next isn't just controversy. It's a story of ambition, influence, and consequences that touch the lives of thousands. Stay with me, because every moment reveals something deeper, darker, and more shocking than the last. Marvin Winans wasn't born into fame or privilege. Like many gospel legends, his journey began in humble surroundings, steeped in church and music. From a young age, he showed an uncanny ability to inspire and lead, drawing people to his voice, his presence, and his charisma. By the time he reached adulthood, he had already carved out a reputation as a gifted singer, a preacher with a powerful message, and a man seemingly destined for greatness. But early success often masks deeper ambitions. Behind the smooth delivery of sermons and the applause at concerts, those closest to him noticed something unusual. A desire for control that went beyond leadership, a hunger for influence that seemed almost divine. Friends from his early ministry recall Marvin speaking in ways that were bold, sometimes unsettling. One close associate remembers him saying, "I'm here to show people what God can do through me," words that at the time seemed innocent, but in hindsight, hinted at a deeper belief in his own authority. By the 1980s and 1990s, Marvin Winans had become more than a gospel singer. He was a household name, a spiritual figure whose words could move thousands. His choir performances, his church appearances, and his family's musical dynasty elevated him to a status many only dream of. But with that visibility came scrutiny. Observers began to notice a pattern. The more power he accumulated, the more he framed himself not just as a messenger of God, but as someone who embodied God's will in ways no one else could. This is where the story takes a turn that few have dared to explore. How did a man, loved and respected by so many, start walking a line that blurred faith, authority, and ego? The answer lies in the next chapter, where ambition meets obsession and the first cracks in Marvin Winans' public image start to appear. But what happened next would shock even his closest supporters. And it all began with a sermon that changed everything. As Marvin Winans' influence grew, so did the intensity of his sermons. What started as uplifting messages of hope and redemption gradually transformed into declarations that left congregations both amazed and uneasy. People didn't just come for the music. They came to witness a man who spoke with a confidence and authority that bordered on audacity. Insiders reveal that during certain sermons, Winans would make statements that sounded, at times, beyond the realm of ordinary preaching. Phrases like, "God has placed me on earth to guide his people in a way no one else can," or, "Through me, God speaks," began to appear more frequently in his public addresses. At first, attendees dismissed these as passionate expressions of faith. But as the statements grew bolder, whispers started to circulate behind closed doors. Was Marvin Winans starting to see himself as more than just a servant of God? It wasn't only the words themselves, it was the effect they had. Congregants described feeling a mix of awe, inspiration, and fear. Some claimed that his sermons had a hypnotic quality, drawing people in, making them question their own beliefs, and rely on him for guidance in ways they had never done before. Church staff and close associates noticed a shift in his demeanor. What had once been humility now carried hints of entitlement, even superiority. But the tension didn't stop there. Marvin's approach to leadership in his ministry also raised eyebrows. Reports surfaced of strict rules, sudden disciplinary measures, and moments where questioning his authority seemed almost forbidden. A former staff member revealed that even minor disagreements could provoke an intense response, leaving employees feeling trapped between devotion and fear. And then came the sermon that would truly ignite controversy. Live in front of thousands, Marvin reportedly declared something that stunned his congregation and made headlines in certain circles. A statement that suggested a level of self-perception many considered blasphemous. Social media buzzed with clips, critics questioned his motives, and church insiders were left scrambling to understand how one man could polarize faith communities so drastically. This was the moment that some insiders point to as the turning point, the moment where admiration began to blend with unease, where whispers of arrogance transformed into serious concern. But what really drove him to speak in such a way? Was it a spiritual revelation, an ego-driven ambition, or something darker entirely? What happened behind the scenes after that sermon would reveal layers of ambition, influence, and secrecy that most people had never imagined. And the truth about what Marvin Winans believed about himself is far more shocking than anyone could have anticipated. Behind the soaring music and thunderous sermons, the inner workings of Marvin Winans' ministry reveal a complex web of power, influence, and secrecy. Those who worked closely with him describe a man who could inspire devotion like few others, but also intimidate, manipulate, and control, with a precision that left many walking on eggshells. Longtime church members recount a culture where loyalty was everything. Questioning decisions, even politely, could be interpreted as betrayal. Staff and volunteers often found themselves caught between admiration for his spiritual gift and fear of crossing him. Some insiders shared chilling anecdotes of moments where Marvin would summon staff to private meetings, and after hours of intense discussion, the room would feel charged with an almost tangible tension. It wasn't just about obedience, one former employee said. It was about absolute submission. You left feeling like you were either part of a higher purpose or doomed if you weren't. Financial decisions within the ministry added another layer of intrigue. Sources allege that Marvin Winans' influence extended beyond the pulpit into areas that blurred ethical boundaries. While the ministry raised millions, questions arose about accountability, spending, and how much of the wealth and power revolved around his personal image, rather than collective ministry goals. Critics argued that the line between spiritual leadership and personal glorification was becoming dangerously thin. Family dynamics also played a pivotal role in this story. Coming from the legendary Winans musical dynasty, Marvin's position carried expectations, pressures, and rivalries. Several relatives reportedly expressed concerns privately, warning that the relentless pursuit of authority could alienate those closest to him. Some insiders describe heated arguments, hidden disagreements, and unspoken tensions that fueled the sense that something was amiss. Yet publicly, everything remained polished and harmonious. And then there were the visitors, high-profile figures, celebrities, and influential leaders who sought Marvin's counsel. Witnesses recall moments where he would assert his guidance as if it were absolute, speaking in a tone that blurred the line between advice and decree. Those experiences left many awed, but some left uneasy, questioning how a man so revered could wield such influence with so little transparency. But what truly startled insiders was a private revelation, a claim that Marvin Winans believed he held a unique, almost divine authority on earth, not just as a messenger, but as someone embodying God's will in ways no one else could. These weren't public statements, but whispers, conversations, and private reflections shared only with those closest to him. And when these beliefs began to seep into his sermons and public appearances, the impact was immediate, drawing both devotion and skepticism. The question looming over his ministry became impossible to ignore. When does spiritual authority cross the line into self-deification? And what does it mean for those who have entrusted their faith, money, and lives to his leadership? When Marvin Winans' bold claims and behind-the-scenes behaviors began to leak into public awareness, the ripple effect was immediate. Social media erupted with debate, clips of his sermons circulated widely, and critics seized the opportunity to question everything about his ministry. Headlines questioned whether one of gospel's most beloved figures had crossed an unthinkable line. Was he positioning himself as God on earth? For supporters, it was a moment of confusion and heartbreak. Many struggled to reconcile the man they admired, the soulful singer, the charismatic preacher, with the controversial figure emerging in reports and videos. Congregants described being torn between loyalty to a man who had inspired generations and shock at the audacity of his statements. Media coverage amplified the controversy. Articles dissected sermons, interviews, and insider accounts, portraying Marvin Winans in a far more complex light than his public persona had ever suggested. Some commentators condemned him outright, calling his claims blasphemous. Others argued that ambitious religious leaders often use exaggerated language to inspire followers, framing his actions as a dangerous but familiar pattern in charismatic ministries. The backlash wasn't limited to the public. Fellow ministers and members of the gospel community also voiced concerns. Private letters and leaked communications indicated a mixture of worry and disbelief. Questions arose about accountability, spiritual guidance, and the ethical boundaries of influence. One respected gospel leader reportedly said, "When a man claims what only God can claim, you can't ignore the consequences. It's a line you don't cross lightly." Meanwhile, Marvin Winans' response, or lack thereof, added fuel to the fire. Some reports indicate that he doubled down on his statements in private meetings, insisting that he was misunderstood by outsiders and even by some members of his congregation. Church insiders described tense moments, whispered debates, and a sense that the ministry's inner circle was split. Some fully supporting him, others quietly questioning whether his trajectory would bring spiritual enlightenment or division. The most shocking aspect of the fallout wasn't just public criticism, it was how deeply it affected those closest to him. Families, longtime staff, and devoted followers found themselves caught in a whirlwind of faith, doubt, and fear. Church attendance reportedly shifted, donations were scrutinized, and discussions that were once private became topics of public debate. For a ministry built on trust, admiration, and spiritual guidance, the fallout threatened to shake its very foundation. Yet even amid the controversy, Marvin Winans maintained a presence of authority. His charisma, musical legacy, and deeply ingrained leadership skills allowed him to weather some storms, keeping core supporters loyal. But cracks were showing, cracks that would grow larger as the story unfolded. And the next chapter reveals moments so dramatic that even his most devoted followers were left questioning whether his ambition had eclipsed his spiritual mission entirely. What happened next? How did this controversy spiral into events that stunned the gospel world and forced insiders to confront uncomfortable truths? The answers lie in the next section, where ambition, influence, and a powerful sense of self collide in ways that few could have anticipated. Behind the public sermons, the musical accolades, and the controversy, there lies a personal story few have ever heard. Sources close to Marvin Winans paint a picture of a man driven by a complex mix of faith, ambition, and an unshakable belief in his own spiritual authority. Friends and former associates reveal that Marvin often spoke privately about feeling chosen in ways that went far beyond ordinary leadership. He genuinely believed he was fulfilling a divine purpose that few could understand, one insider said. Yet, those closest to him also noticed moments of vulnerability, instances where the weight of expectation and the isolation of influence pressed heavily on him. This duality, a man of profound talent and faith, but also of intense personal ambition, created a tension that would define his ministry. Some former staff recount late-night conversations where Marvin expressed frustration at being misunderstood. He felt that the media, even well-meaning colleagues, failed to see the depth of his calling. He wasn't trying to elevate himself, one insider explained, at least not in his mind. He believed the message required him to step into a role that was bigger than what most could grasp. Yet, the line between divine purpose and self-deification had blurred, and that ambiguity fueled both devotion and controversy. The personal consequences were immediate and far-reaching, relationships strained under the pressure. Longtime supporters questioned their loyalty, and the very foundation of the ministry wavered. For Marvin, the challenge was not just external criticism, it was reconciling his vision with the reality of human perception. How do you lead millions while remaining true to your belief, without losing the trust of those who look to you for guidance? And here is the most startling truth. Insiders claim Marvin Winans' confidence in his own authority was not born of arrogance alone. It was rooted in years of experience, spiritual encounters, and the constant adoration of thousands. Yet, this same confidence, when unchecked, became a source of tension, misunderstanding, and deep scrutiny. What was intended as divine purpose was often perceived as hubris. In the end, the story of Marvin Winans is a cautionary tale, a reflection on the delicate balance between faith, power, and human ambition. It's a reminder that even revered figures, those who inspire millions, are vulnerable to the complexities of ego, perception, and influence. The legacy he leaves behind is a mix of inspiration, controversy, and unanswered questions that continue to provoke discussion in the gospel world today. So, what can we learn from this? That faith, talent, and influence are gifts, and with them comes responsibility. That admiration must be tempered with critical thinking, and that even the most celebrated leaders are human, capable of both profound insight and startling missteps. The truth about Marvin Winans is not simple, nor is it entirely comfortable, but it's real. And by understanding it, we gain insight into the challenges of leadership, the dangers of unchecked authority, and the human side of even the most iconic spiritual figures. Conclusion: Marvin Winans' story is one of greatness and controversy, of faith and ambition, of a man whose extraordinary talents and convictions sparked admiration and concern. From the rise of a gospel legend to the whispers of self-perception that shocked followers, the journey reveals the complex intersection of spirituality and human ambition. Now, it's your turn to reflect. What do you think drives leaders like Marvin Winans? Is it pure faith or something more complicated? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive into the hidden stories behind America's most influential figures. And if you want more stories that expose the truth behind the headlines, check out our upcoming videos. You won't believe what we'll reveal next.